Lee Merritt, thank you so much for your time. You are a civil rights attorney, a community organizer, and now you want to be the next Texas Attorney General. Why, and what are your top priorities?
Well, for the bulk of my career, I've operated as a constitutional lawyer in the state of Texas. I came here specifically to practice before the Fifth Circuit because there has been some challenging case law to come out of Texas and the Fifth Circuit in general concerning individual rights. We've seen that play out in the national conversation now. We've seen for example, the Voting Rights Act gutted, and we've seen Texans be discriminated against in terms of their access to the polls. We've seen Texas women's rights being undermined by a legislator that hasn't been checked by the Attorney General's office. The AG's office is supposed to be the people's firm, one that ensures that the constitutional protections afforded to all citizens in the state of Texas are respected. My practice already advocates for Texas families. I want to use the reputation that we've built over time to advocate a little further up the river.
And what is a message for voters a concrete message for voters that they can take away from our discussion today, as far as your campaign message?
Our campaign is all about improving the quality of life for Texans in a way that the AG's office has not historically been used to serve Texans, at least in the last 30 years of Republican control. The AG's office has been used to serve special interests, to serve corporations. We're dealing with a specifically corrupt Attorney General who's not only been criminally indicted, but is always involved in some sort of controversy that pits him against the people of Texas. Most recently, the United States Supreme Court decided that the Attorney General's office, the governor's office, could not interfere with local control of school systems and their ability to have mask mandates. I say all that as an example that what people can expect from an Attorney General's office under my leadership is that instead of siding against the people, that this will be an office that workers, the community folks, people who are impacted, for example, by the power grid crisis, it's a place that they can go to for legal support and not the other way around.
Before you get to the general election, you got to go through the primary. You're facing a challenge from two other candidates right now. Why do you believe you are the best Democrat to take on either Ken Paxton or any Republican?
Our campaign is uniquely positioned, not only with a national voice, but we've actively been involved in the fight for workers' rights for the average citizen across the state of Texas. And so we've already been battling Attorney General Ken Paxton concerning his transparency and access to records, enforcing the law enforcing protections for citizens in Texas. We've done that all across the country. We've worked with Keith Ellison in Minnesota for the family of George Floyd. We continue to work for the family of Ahmaud Arbery. We've been active in things as important for Texans as disaster relief efforts following the winter crisis. We want to continue that work from the AG's office. We want to continue that work with the resources available provided by our tax dollars.
But what would you say to the Democrats out there who are going to be weighing you and the other candidates about what separates you from the others?
Well, in order to win statewide in Texas, we're going to have to run a dynamic campaign. We're going to have to motivate people who have not come out and cast their vote to participate. So far, the Democratic Party has come really, really close in this race. The last race for AG came down to less than 4% of the vote. Our platform, our campaign introduces an opportunity to motivate people who have sat out on the sidelines, specifically black and brown voters in Texas, who are registered to vote, who are Democratic leaning, but have not participated in the process. We think that our campaign is uniquely situated to bring out those voters that Texans, that Democrats will need to win up and down the ticket.
We were speaking before, and aside from the issues that you just discussed, you were also concerned about executions. So talk to me about your concerns as it relates to that and how it may apply to Texas.
So a lot of the work that I've done in Texas has to do with the constitutional protections for citizens being faced with the deadliest police culture in the modern world and the most incarcerated nation in world history. Texas leads the rest of the country in executions. They lead the rest of the country in incarceration, and they lead the rest of the country next to California in the use of deadly force. I certainly will be bringing in my experience as a constitutional attorney here in the state of Texas to come up with policies that better serve law enforcement officers who everyone agrees has been asked to do too much. Governor Greg Abbott pointed out in his State of the State that Texas is experiencing what some have called a second pandemic, which is a mental health crisis. And law enforcement has been given the sole responsibility of meeting that crisis. And they don't have the resources to do it. So something that we've advocated for in my constitutional practice is protections afforded to Texans under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is a policy or a tack I think it should be being pursued from the Attorney General's office, advocating both for law enforcement to give them additional resources that they need to serve people in mental health crisis and to provide additional protections to the community.
So are you talking about, like in the city of Dallas, we've seen mental health teams going out with law enforcement. Is that something that you're referring to?
That's exactly it. So we've seen in certain cities in Texas, like Dallas or in Austin, where there have been some significant progressive strategies performed so that law enforcement is not the only response that we have to the mental health crisis. I think we need a statewide policy that invests more in mental health resources and doctors and nurses in responding to mental health calls as opposed to 911.
And let me ask you just about some of the other issues facing the state. One thing you mentioned the mask mandates before and the fight over that. Now we're discussing about the vaccine mandates because there's the rule, as you know, by the Biden administration through OSHA to require large employers with 100 employees or more to either require the COVID-19 vaccine or regular testing. Governor Abbott has said, and the Attorney General has said, they prefer a ban on vaccine mandates in the state of Texas. Where are you on this issue?
Well, it's interesting to see what the courts are doing, and I think the courts are more or less tackling the correct position. It used to be a Republican principle that these decisions should come down to local control. But we don't see that happening now with this current administration. We have the governor and the attorney general attempting to force their principles on regional leadership, school directors against county judges, to ban certain safety precautions that the science says is best for their regions. So I think that my position is that local leaders should be able to make decisions concerning mandates of masks. And that the local leaders should be able to make decisions, particularly in terms of businesses. Again, it's been a Republican principle that businesses should be allowed to do what the market demands. Laissez-faire, limited governmental interference in decisions that they make for their businesses. And if people choose not to work at businesses or support businesses that have mask mandates, then they'll pay the economic consequences of that. That is not a governmental position. So I think that our executive branch should get out of the business of forcing their will on local leaders.
Another case that's gotten a lot of attention recently, and we are waiting as the state to hear what the U.S. Supreme Court decides, is the Texas Heartbeat Act, the abortion law. What did you make of the state's argument and the law itself, where it is civil lawsuits that are the enforcement mechanism? Right. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think it's embarrassing that the Texas Attorney General's office is arguing that because they've passed on the enforcement responsibility of their heartbeat ban to private citizens, that the Constitution no longer applies. The truth is that under Roe v. Wade, which is still the law of the land, women in Texas have the right to choose concerning their reproductive decisions. And right now, the Attorney General's office and the arguments before the Supreme Court are trying to strip that control away from them. And instead of unlawfully allowing state agents to do it, they've deputized everyone in the country to do things as extreme as have bounty hunts on women and people who are are participating in aiding women in making very, very difficult decisions concerning their reproductive rights. The law says that that is a decision that a woman gets to make. I think that women's rights should be protected in Texas, and the AG's office shouldn't be undermined.
And so, what do you expect the court to do?
I believe the court will side in favor of Texas women and the rights afforded them under Roe v. Wade. Now, there is a test balloon case that's coming before the Supreme Court in June, and that will be an opportunity for the court to make a decision whether or not Roe v. Wade should still be the law of the land. But today, Roe v. Wade is, in fact, the law of the land. I think the courts will uphold the law.
And you're talking about the Mississippi case.
That's correct.
That they're going to hear. One thing that we heard from Beto O'Rourke as he jumped into the race for governor was his position on legalizing marijuana. Where are you on that?
I agree with the candidate O'Rourke that Texas should be moving to legalize marijuana. But as we do so, I think we should pay attention to the last 50 years of policy out of Austin that has criminalized not only the use of marijuana, but has really depressed communities in enforcement of draconian drug law policies that have ruined people's futures. So as we move towards legalizing marijuana, we need to be doing the re-entry work that it requires to undo some of the damage caused to communities with policies that have criminalized it and have injured people, continues to injure people today who are incarcerated for marijuana possession and marijuana use.
I wanted to ask you about an issue that we're seeing pop up around the state and around the country, and that is controversy over school books in libraries and even access to books online with content that some parents don't like. We've seen the governor take a position on that. Where are you on these school books? Do you think it's too much attention being paid to them or not?
I think that this is a critical issue that we're going to be dealing with in the Attorney General's race. The fact is that Governor Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton has been busy defunding schools through their policies. They're filing lawsuits against school districts concerning books, concerning mask mandates, and these are, again, decisions that really should be left to superintendents, to educators, to people elected in various school board regions to make those kind of decisions that best serve the community. We can't turn our schools into political, landmines. Our educators need to be free to teach what the experts, what the professionals to dictate those standards. I was a former school teacher, and I couldn't imagine having a politician in Austin tell me, what I should be sharing with the students when when I get my best practices and my TEKs from my school board.
So in a Lee Merritt administration in the Attorney General, as Attorney General, if you received any complaints about this topic, for example, you would say this needs to be handled on a local matter.
That's right. These decisions ultimately come down to people from the superintendent down to the school board, people who have been elected by the people, by parents that directly impact the students in the regions that they serve. Instead of making it about Trump's agenda or Abbott's agenda in, for example, Dallas County, those decisions should be being made by Dallas County voters.
I wanted to ask you about the border. How would you characterize the situation there, and what, if any, role do you think the Texas Attorney General should play?
I think it's fair to characterize what's going on at the border as a crisis. There's a buildup of people, a humanitarian crisis, of people who are seeking asylum according to international laws, agreements that that our country has made and that Texas has made to provide a fair and accessible asylum-seeking process at our borders. We are not living up to the commitments that we've made to the international community. We need to commit more attorneys, more translators, more social workers to the border in order to meet the rising demand, this expected demand. This is seasonal. And instead of turning it into a political football every year of the blame game, we should listen to border communities and come up with solutions that actually work.
I did also want to go back to discuss a little bit as far as what we heard last year in the 2020 elections especially in state offices, about the controversy over defunding the police. And where are you on this particular issue? Do you think that there should be changes as far as training is concerned for police, as far as funding for police departments? Where do you fall?
You know, it's funny we're discussing the idea of defunding the police around the border issue, because in order to build an ineffective and in many ways illegal wall, we've defunded law enforcement. We've taken money away from our public safety budget and put it into a multi-billion-dollar fence that doesn't make any of us safer, or a wall that doesn't make any of us safer. Law enforcement needs additional resources. We just need a better way of distributing those resources. And so in places like Dallas and Austin, some of the progressive cities around America, we've seen more of an investment in mental health. That's not defunding the police, it's making wise investments with the limited resources that we have to deal with the actual facts on the ground. You know, defund the police is a bad mantra. It shouldn't be used. It's something that's been used nationwide and here in Texas to create a division that I don't think is there. When I meet with Chief Steve McGraw of the Texas State Troopers, when I meet with prosecutors in Bell County, Hunt County, Dallas County, all over the country, we all agree that law enforcement has been overwhelmed and that they need additional help. But the additional help shouldn't come in the form of a militarized buildup. It should come in the form of resources the community needs to meet the actual crisis.
And my last question to you is about the Attorney General himself, Ken Paxton. There's been a lot of talk lately about how the Republican primary is increasing, you know, there are more candidates in there. How vulnerable do you think the Attorney General is if he were to become the nominee?
I think Ken Paxton will be the nominee because he has received the endorsement of Donald Trump, and it's going to be difficult for all those primary opponents to help him overcome that. The problem is you have somebody who is clearly not good for Texas, being both the incumbent and the Republican option. I think that gives Democrats like myself a real chance to expose his many failures, both policy and his private life, in terms of how that has interfered with his responsibility of serving Texans, and to provide a contrast. So on the one hand, you have someone who is mired in conflict, holding the nomination from the Republican Party. If we nominate someone like my office, my campaign, with a reputation of actually fighting for Texans and winning and serving communities and bringing communities together, I think we have a real shot of seeing the first Black Attorney General in the history of the state of Texas, but also the first Democratic win statewide in almost 30 years.
And how important would that be to you to become the first Black Attorney General?
It's critically important that we win this race. I think this is our season to win. That right now the community is sensitive to issues that are normally not discussed on a statewide level. It's not enough just to be the first Black Attorney General, but this will be the first time that we've seen a constitutional lawyer, someone who advocates on behalf of citizens in general, assume that position. We cannot allow that office to continue to be under the influence of private interests of corporations. And this is a chance for the people of Texas to have a candidate or to have a Attorney General in office that actually advocates for people.
Lee Merritt, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.